Just got back from shopping, got some rump roast, and I have some London broil, and I have some steaks, and all kinds of beef. And in the fridge I got some pork, and I got some chicken. So we're going to do a video just on sous vide cooking. Now, not everyone has one, but it's a great thing to have, and we're going to go into this in more detail. The primary issue I have with meat, and especially with this thing, I mean, this is probably about 4 inches thick. We can't jam this into the freeze dryer, and the thicker the meat, the harder it is to get the sublimation out of the meat, to get the moisture out of the meat. So how thick or how thin do you cut the meat? Well, I'd probably say the limit is going to be 1 inch. If you can make it smaller, it'll freeze dry much better. I like doing everything 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and so that's the big issue I have, is how thick should you slice your meat? How thick should you slice your meat? Well, obviously you can't get this thing and jam it into the freeze dryer. That's just way too big. The shelf space is going to be the ultimate limit, but 1.5 inches is going to be way too thick to freeze dry. I like to kind of keep the meat maybe about 1/2 inch, and so that's the big kind of the quandary. You can freeze dry 1 inch thick piece of meat, but its reconstitution is going to be the more difficult part. So we're going to pretty much keep all of our meat about 1/2 inch thick. And so we're going to be doing chicken, pork, and beef in the sous vide, and we'll rehydrate everything and see how it comes out. So this is going to be a sous vide only video with all different kinds of meat. When preparing your meat, you obviously is going to have to cut some of the fat. Now, if there's good marbling in here, not a problem. But like this back fat right here, this is like 1/4 inch thick. This has to come off because the fat just will not do well in the freeze dryer unless it's rendered. So I'm going to prepare all the meat, get it as lean as we can, and that's one of the problems, because the fat has a lot of flavor, and to get your meat too lean, you just don't have that fat. And so sometimes after I rehydrate it, I will introduce fat back into the meat by way of either olive oil or avocado oil. So this is our rump roast and eye of round. It's all been cubed, and we're going to take half of this and sous vide it, and then the other half we're just going to brown in a skillet and then freeze dry, and then we'll see how it comes out. And this is all the fat that was trimmed off of the meat, because you need to get this meat as lean as possible. The London broil, which is one of my favorites, we're just going to take this piece and we're just going to cut this in 2 pieces and prepare this. And once again, we'll prepare it, and half will be sous vide and half will be prepared the regular way. This is the heart of a sous vide cooker. It basically has all the controls on the top, and it has the heating coils right here that go down into the water, and a little clamp that clamps on the side of the container. Now you can buy this either separately, or you can buy it with this big huge tank, and this tank probably holds about 7 gallons of water. So these two together constitute sous vide cooking. Now, it can get kind of pricey from time to time. This unit right here, I think, currently sells for around $200 on Amazon, but you could probably shop around and find something a little bit cheaper. If you decide not to buy all the components, you can buy just a heating element by itself, which can then go into the standard pot. So you can just go right inside the clamp, and then you can do your sous vide cooking in this, and then you can cover the top of this, the top of the pot, with either aluminum foil or clear plastic wrap to help hold the heat and the moisture from escaping while you're cooking. There is a convenience factor by buying the entire set, because you get a large reservoir, you get the lid that has the skirt right here that holds the heating assembly in nice and tight, and you also have a rack to where you can attach the bags of food. And in this case, the sous-vide just goes inside, clamps into place. The rack is then placed inside, and then the cover on top, so that everything then has a nice tight fit. The heating element for the sous-vide cooker is quite accurate. There's a little circulation pump inside that circulates the water, and the temperature is quite accurate also. It goes down to 1/10 of 1 degree. It also has a timer, and in many cases, such as this one right here, it also has Wi-Fi that can notify your cell phone when cooking is complete. In the past, most of the cooking I've done with my sous vide has been steak, but in this episode, we're going to try a number of different types of meat. So I have a rump roast that's been cut up into small cubes. I have a London broil, and I have some pork chops, pork loin, and I have some chicken breast. Now, I've never done chicken before of the sensitivity to a proper cooking temperature, but we're going to go ahead and try it and see what happens, and then all this meat is going to be freeze-dried. The cooking temperature on the beef and the pork are quite similar, but the cooking time on the chicken is a little bit longer and the temperature is a little bit higher. So we're going to put everything in the sous vide at the same time, and then as it comes up to temperature and to time, we'll pull things out. The chicken will be the last thing to come out, and we'll have to increase the temperature of the chicken to finish it up. With sous vide cooking, you just don't put your meat into the water. Your meat has to be inside some kind of a bag. Now, I have this American Harvest machine. It's a vacuum sealer, and it comes with these bags that are perforated on one side that allows the vacuum to be sucked out of the bag. And these are actually the best things to do sous vide cooking with. You put your meat inside with or without a marinade, and then you can put them into the sealer and basically vacuum pack it. You want to be able to do that because you want the hot water of the sous vide to surround the meat that you're cooking. The extra benefit you also get with putting meat into a bag is you can put a marinade in with it. Now, when you're vacuum sealing, you got to be careful not to suck the marinade out of the bag into the machine. But I did make up some marinade, and this is one of my favorite, combinations of marinade. It's basically water with equal parts of lemon juice, garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, and dry mustard. I always want to put something like a lemon juice or something that has some acid in it to just make the meat a little bit better. You don't need to use a marinade. You can just put the meat in by itself, or you can also put a dry rub on your meat and then cook it sous vide style. Now, if you don't have one of these little vacuum sealers, you can also use just a Ziploc bag. I've done this before and it's not a problem. It's just you have to make sure you get a good quality Ziploc bag that has a good seal to it so that it doesn't leak during the cooking process. I'm going to go through and I'm going to go ahead and start packing up my meat. Some meat I'm going to use a dry rub. I have like an all-season salt that I can use on some of the meat. I have my own little special chicken seasoning I can put on my chicken, and I have this kind of a barbecue rub that I can put on some of the beef. So we're going to go ahead and start sealing everything up. Some of the meat will be vacuum packed. Some of the meat will just be in a Ziploc bag, and I'm going to try to burp as much air out of the Ziploc bag as possible. Now, if you're going to be using these vacuum bags, you want to cut them a little bit on the long side because the meat's going to be down here, and you want to have enough material on this end that can go up and over the rack in the sous vide and then use a clip to hold the meat into place. So this is my first bag of meat. You can see how nice and tight it is. Now I just did this meat by itself. This basically was a roast cut up into little chunks I'm probably going to use for making stews and such. Now, one other thing about cleanliness and cross-contamination. I'm handling this meat with my hands. They've been washed. I'm getting the blood on the outside of my bag. I'm getting some of the juices on the machine. So before I go to the pork and before I go to the chicken, I'm going to clean all this up so we don't cross-contaminate any other meats with the juices of the other meats. So that's just one thing you might want to think about as you're doing this, since we're doing 3 different types of meats. I have a London broil cut in half, and you can see this meat is quite thick. It's almost 2 inches thick. Now the thicker the meat, the longer it's going to take to cook. So if you're going to have a big piece of meat like this, or like a big roast, you might want to cut it up into smaller sections to be able to cook it. A normal size roast can take anywhere from 12 to 30 hours to cook because it's so thick and dense. It takes a long time for all that heat to penetrate through it. So I would not cook anything thicker than 2 inches in a sous vide. Slice it down a little bit so you can reduce your cooking times. Now with this London broil, I'm going to add some of my marinade. Not a whole lot, just a little bit, maybe a 1/4 cup. Okay, so this one has some of my marinade in it. It's been sucked to the plastic, and this marinade will give me a good taste, a good flavor once this thing is done. My second London broil is going to have a dry rub on it. So this has a little bit of all kinds of seasoning. So this is just going to go on dry. That goes in the bag. So this is my dry rub London broil, and like I said once before, I have a lot of extra material up here so I can attach it to the rack, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment. Okay, so all my beef is now done, and so now I'm going to clean everything up so I don't have any cross-contamination as I move on to the pork. We're now doing the pork. This right here is pork loin, and I cut this in about 1/2 inch thick slices. I'm going to make Wiener schnitzel out of this, and so right now it's a 1/2 inch thick, but once I end up pounding this down, it'll be only about a 1/4 inch to 3/16 inch thick. And this is not going to have any seasoning because the Wiener schnitzel will have its own seasoning. I'm going to want to lay this flat down in the bag so that we don't have pieces of meat on top of each other. Now, one thing I was going to mention, if you're doing meat with a marinade, you might want to put the sealer on the edge of the counter so that the bag hangs off the counter, and then seal it that way. It'll just make it harder for the marinade to come up out of the bag into the sealer. The next cut of meat is a pork chop, and this is actually a bone-in pork chop. If I was going to freeze dry this, I'd get some pork chops without a bone. I do not have enough information to make a recommendation or not whether you should freeze dry any meat with a bone. At this point, I'd probably not recommend it because I'm not sure if all the moisture in the bone deep inside the marrow can be removed, and if that would be a breeding place for bacteria later on. So I'm not going to make any recommendation to do any freeze-dried meat with a bone. This meat right here is going to have my dry rub seasoning on it. I'm just going to sous vide these and have them for tonight's dinner rather than to freeze-dry them. Okay, so this is done. All the pork is now done. We're going to go ahead and decontaminate everything and move on to the chicken. Beef is a fairly safe meat to work with. Pork is becoming a very safe meat. You don't really hear issues of trichinosis anymore from pork products. However, chicken can still be a little bit dodgy. Now these chicken breasts are 2 inches thick. They're quite large breasts. And so the sous-vide does not do well with thick meats, and neither does a freeze dryer. So with these nice thick chicken breasts, I'm going to slice these into 1/2-inch strips. Or I might just end up cubing them all together. And we're going to lay them side by side in the bag, trying to keep them from overlapping, because we need the chicken to be thin, not thick, to cook sous vide style. So this is the last of our meat, so we're going to go ahead and get the sous vide up and running. So we got the sous vide container here, or the tank you could say. I'm going to go ahead and start filling this up, and I might as well use hot water. Now I got a lot of meat to put into this, and so you're going to have to maybe adjust the water level depending on how much you're putting in here. The clips I like to use are these metal kind of alligator clips. I'm not sure exactly what they're called, but I like to use these to secure the bags to the rack. So we're going to put the rack in place, and all the meat. We're going to do the chicken first. That will kind of be fed through there. We'll just kind of lie down in there. Use a clip to hold it into place. I got the pork chops. And you see this is the pork loin. Now normally I would not put this much meat in a sous vide, and I'm probably overloading it as it is. And if that's the case, I might have to take some of this out and do a second batch. And my London broil is barely fitting through here. And then this is my other London broil. And then this is my chunky beef, my cubed beef right here. And it looks like I might be getting to the point where I don't have any room. Yeah, I got just a little bit of room here. So I'm going to see if I can get this in here and get this to lay down. Like I said, I'm really overloading this quite a bit. So it's just like a freeze dryer. There's only so much you can put in here at one time. Okay, so everything's in there. The lid then goes back on top, and the heating element goes right through here. Now, if it was just beef alone, I'd usually would put the temperature at 131 degrees. But for all the beef and all the pork, it calls for 134 degrees. The chicken calls for 146 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and set this at 134. So I plugged it in. Okay, so this is the little, you can see right now my hot water is 138.4. So I'm going to take this up to 134 degrees right there, and then I'm going to set the timer for 3 hours. Okay, that's it. and then I'm just going to go ahead and start it. Now there is a Wi-Fi option on here. I haven't figured it out yet, but this would, if I use the Wi-Fi option, this would tell me when it's cooked. So we're at 137 degrees. Our set point's 134, and it's high because of the hot water, but eventually this will drop down, and we'll come back and check this throughout the day. And then once the beef is done in 3 hours, then we'll go ahead and raise the temperature up to 146 and do it for another hour or so to take care of the chicken. Okay, we've done 3 hours with our sous vide. So it's time to clear this. Now I'm going to take out all the beef and the pork, and we're going to leave the chicken in here and finish that later on if I can remember where the chicken was. Okay, so this is our pork tenderloin, and this is our London broil, and I believe that's our chicken. That's another piece of London broil. These are our pork chops, and this is our cubed roast beef. So this is going to go back in, and the temperature on this is going to be raised to 146 degrees. For another hour. And we'll come back in an hour from now. The first bag of food we have, this is the roast beef that was cubed like into stew meat. So this is basically cooked, but this is all cooked to medium rare, and that's pretty much where it's going to be nice and tender. You could almost eat this as it is, but with any of these meats, I'd make sure that they were fully cooked. Okay, so this is ready to go into the freezer. I always pre-freeze my food. It just puts a little bit less wear and tear on my freeze dryer. The next one is my London broil. This is the London broil that I had in marinade, and this is the London broil that was with the spices, the hand rubbed. And this should be cooked to a perfect medium rare. So let me slice this right in two. We'll take a look at the cook on this. Hopefully you can see that, but that is about as medium rare as it can go. It looks really, really good. And wow. For a London broil, this is very, very tender. So we're going to take this. Now, I can't put this big thick piece of meat in the freeze dryer. I could, but it's going to take a long time to get all the moisture out of the middle of this. So we're going to slice this thin, probably about 1/2 inch strips. Then we're going to lay them on the tray and pre-freeze them. So the question is, why sous vide? Why sous vide the meat at all? Well, the one thing is sous vide does a perfect cook on meat. You can control it. And out of all the meat I've reconstituted, the sous vide meat comes back the best. If I recall, if you go over to and look at the video from Ballistic Barbecue, he does some steaks, and one of the steaks that he does is also through sous vide. And if I recall, that steak came back the best. So, I mean, if you take a look at the cook on this, this is absolutely wonderful. So we're going to freeze dry these and bring it back and see how they reconstitute. The last bag we have is going to be our pork loin. Now, this is going to be, if this comes back as I'm hoping it will be, I can make some Wiener schnitzel out of this. So let's go ahead and place this on here and see how that comes out. So I'll have to get some more stuff to finish up this tray, and I could probably maybe put the chicken on the other side, but I'll probably have not enough room. So this tray might just go in half full. So far we have the cubed roast, we got the London broil, and we have the pork loin. So the chicken is now done. Now the chicken was cooked at 146 degrees. Now there's an issue with this, that the internal temperature of chicken should be 165 degrees. Now the people who do the sous vide cooking will cook it at 145 degrees. So there's a little bit of a problem there between temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and treat this chicken as if it was still somewhat raw. Now the temperature is almost there to what is considered a safe temperature for chicken, but I will reach that temperature when I cook this chicken again once it's reconstituted from being freeze dried. But until then, I will treat this chicken as if it was raw. These are my sous vide meats. They just came out of the freeze dryer just now. So this is my roast that I cubed up. I'll probably be using this for stew meat. Came out very well. And this is my lemon broil that came out really nice. I'm very pleased with how that came out. And these are my other sous vide meats. This is a pork tenderloin, and I'm going to try to do is when I reconstitute the pork, I'm going to see if I can still hammer it flat to make Wiener schnitzel out of the tenderloin. So I'm hoping that this is not too cooked for that. Now the important one is the chicken. Now this was the first time I actually did chicken in my sous vide. I was a little bit wary about doing chicken because of the temperatures, but I did some research and I found out some very interesting things. Now, we all know that chicken cannot be pink. It can't be pink at all. That's an absolute no-no. And we've been told that chicken has to be at 165 degrees to be cooked, and that is true. But it only has to be 165 degrees for 1 second, just an instant, and everything's done. But actually, the bacteria that is in chicken will start to be killed at 135 degrees. Now, it'll start to be killed, and basically the ratings with the FDA basically says if you can have chicken meat at 145 degrees for 8.5 minutes, that is the same bacterial reduction as meat that is at 165 degrees for just an instant. So that's the reason why people who cook sous vide style can get away with doing chicken at 145 degrees for say for 3 or 4 hours. So that answers my question. I feel pretty comfortable about that, but you know, our hard habits are hard to break, but I'll probably still make sure that this is cooked well. So between my pork, my chicken, And my beef, I'm going to go ahead and do some experiments on this, on reconstituting them, and see how they come back. And then I'll bag these up and add them to my inventory. These are my 4 samples I'm going to reconstitute. So I have some London broil, some rump roast that's been cubed, my pork tenderloin, and chicken. I'm going to go ahead and add some hot water to these samples and leave them in the fridge overnight to reconstitute, and then tomorrow we'll see how they come out. Now, if I was going to rehydrate this meat for my upcoming dinner, then other than just putting hot water in to reconstitute the meat, you can put hot water with some seasoning. You can put some hot water with some garlic powder, onion powder, whatever your best seasonings are. And as the meat sucks in that moisture, it will also suck in all that flavor into the core of the meat. And that's the neatest thing about rehydrating meat that's been freeze-dried, is you can manipulate the flavors deep down inside into the tissue of the meat to make the meat even better. First, we're going to start with the chicken. I have some butter and lemon juice. I'm going to brush on the chicken, and that will help hold the seasoning onto the meat. The chicken has already been cooked basically. We just want to throw some flavor onto it, put it on the grill just for a moment and finish it off and get a bit of a char on it. But for all intents and purposes, the Sous-Vide made this so it's edible now. Now the lemon and the butter not just helps the seasoning stick to it, but it can also help regulate the heat that's going to be generated by the burners. So it kind of cools it down from time to time. So let's check this out. The chicken tears apart really easy. It's nice and flaky. Very tender. And if you take a look at this, this is so tender and so juicy, and the seasoning really complements this. I don't think anyone could ever tell that this chicken was freeze-dried. It's absolutely wonderful. And I think that's one of the benefits of cooking meat with a sous vide, is because I think the end product is so much better. The next contender is the cubed roast beef that we did. This is actually eye of round roast beef, but pretty much the same. And we're going to go ahead and fry that up in the skillet. This is something you could, throw in with some hash browns or chili or any kind of a soup or stew. And we're going to have a taste of that. And this is going to be unseasoned. Now we're just going to kind of brown this real quick because this has virtually already been cooked. going to add a little bit of salt and pepper. It's tender but yet firm, just like you expect meat to be like in a chili. I guess it's hard to explain the quality of this meat, but this is very, very good. I guess you'll just have to trust me, and if you plan on getting a sous vide or know someone who has a sous vide, see if you can borrow it just for a day. But this would be an excellent addition to anyone's food storage. Next up is going to be our London broil, and you can actually see some of the juices in the bag after rehydrating, almost as if this was never freeze dried at all. So we're going to go ahead and flash char this in a pan with some avocado oil. I like avocado oil because you can take it to very high temperature. And if I did this right, one of these pieces, this piece should be a dry rub and this one should be marinated. So I got one of each. Okay, our pan is smoking, so that's telling me it's plenty warm. And we're just going to keep this in here just for a couple of seconds. We just want to get it charred. This meat has already been cooked to a medium rare. So we don't want to cook it any more than we have to. Well, it's hard to see the pink, but there is just a slight bit of pink going across the middle of that. That might be able to see a little bit easier, but it's still pretty much, it might just be more towards the medium than medium rare. But we'll have to see what the taste is. Good taste, good texture. From someone who's eaten a lot of freeze-dried meat, one thing that is sometimes common with freeze-dried meat, especially with steaks, is there's always this little dark line that runs through the meat, and that is not present on this meat because of the sous vide. And sometimes you get these dry spots in the meat that sometimes don't become fully hydrated, but this is not the case with this London broil. So I'd say this is very successful also. The last piece of meat we have to play around with is my pork loin. Now, if I was going to be making actual Wiener schnitzel the correct way, if I was going to do it freeze-dried, I would have used raw pork loin and then rehydrated it. So this pork loin is pretty much cooked already, but I think I can still probably get away with it. We're going to have to hit this, with a tenderizing mallet. If you're going to do this, I have quartz cabinets, and you might want to put down a towel, kitchen towel or two to help absorb some of the shock, because you don't want to crack your cabinets. And it's also a little bit quieter. This might work after all. Time to tell you a story. This Wiener schnitzel recipe comes from Austria, Vienna, Austria, but people do not call Vienna Vienna, they call it Wien, W-I-E-N, and they pronounce the W's like a V, and that's where my mom is from. My mom fled Austria right at the time of the Anschluss, and that's when Austria capitulated to Hitler and pretty much rolled over. And she was sponsored by a family in Wisconsin that sponsored her, and she was able to leave before total war broke out for World War II. But anyway, she, while in Vienna, or Wien, she worked at a restaurant, and this is the schnitzel recipe. So if you take the word of Wiener schnitzel, the first four letters of Wiener schnitzel is W-I-E-N, and that's for the city of Vienna. So in a sense, this is called Vienna schnitzel. Many of the different towns or cities in Austria had their own schnitzel. Like there might be Salzburg schnitzel, there's Wiener schnitzel, and different schnitzels that the towns might have in tradition. So this is the Wiener schnitzel, and it's not a hot dog. So bowl number one has 1 cup flour, 1 teaspoon salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, half a teaspoon of paprika, and a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. So we're just going to mix all this up nice and evenly. Now this is the first bowl, and so the powder is going to stick to the meat and make it so that well, I'll show you here. Okay, that's the first bowl. The second bowl has a 1/4 cup of milk and 1 egg. And so the powdered meat comes into this bowl, and when the surface of the powdered meat and the eggs join together, it kind of makes a sticky coating that then allows the breadcrumbs to stick to it. So just to let you know, this is actually gluten-free flour, and these are gluten-free breadcrumbs. So this is actually a gluten-free dish, a very delicious dish. So when making Wiener schnitzel, we're going to have a wet hand and a dry hand. We don't want to interchange them because it's just going to get messy. So we're going to pick up the meat. We're going to pick up the meat with the dry hand and put it into the flour. And we're going to cover it all up. And like I said before, if I really wanted to make this the proper way, I would have used raw meat, not pre-cooked freeze-dry meat. Okay, dry hand goes to the liquid hand. So we're going to push that down underneath the surface, like so. Now with the wet hand, we're going to pick up the meat and put it on the breadcrumbs. With the dry hand, we're going to flick some of this breadcrumbs over onto it. With the wet hand, we're going to flip it. Dry hand, we're going to pack the breadcrumbs to it till it's no longer sticky. And often when making this, you have to resupply the breadcrumbs more often than anything else. The breadcrumbs have the same ingredients as the flour. 1 teaspoon salt, half a teaspoon pepper, half a teaspoon paprika, and a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. So this one is done and ready to go into the fry pan. And we have to make the other one. Now into our fry pan, we're going to add 1/8 cup of oil. And we're going to do that every time we make another batch of Wiener schnitzel. After this batch of Wiener schnitzel, we'll get a paper towel and just quickly wipe out the fry pan, taking with it any oil or breadcrumbs, and we'll put that into a metal bowl, and then we'll add new oil back into the fry pan. You do that so that you don't get burnt bits that will cling to your Wiener schnitzel later on. So after each batch, you just wipe out the pan, put another 1/8 cup of oil, and then do the next batch, and I'm on medium-high heat. Wiener schnitzel cooks pretty fast, especially when your meat is pre-cooked. So you just basically want to brown each side pretty well, and you'll be done, because the meat itself is only going to be maybe 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch thick. Remember the song and the Sound of Music? Some of my favorite things, and they say it's schnitzel with noodles. Well, that's just something that went, that rhymed with the song. Austrians do not eat noodles with their schnitzel. What they do eat is different types of potato salad, which is really big in Austria. But whatever you want to have as a side is just fine. Now, when serving schnitzel, you cannot forget the best and the most important ingredient, a lemon. So just take a lemon wedge. If you don't have lemons, you might just have to use the concentrate. But just go ahead and break it over the Wiener schnitzel and give it a good dousing. And you're probably thinking I'm nuts, but you'd be surprised how delicious it is. This is so delicious. I mean, it's up there with being a comfort food. And it's so tender, I really don't even need a knife to cut it, because the meat has been pounded so well. You got to try Wiener Schnitzel. Either my recipe or anybody's recipe, but my recipe is genuine. And don't forget the lemon. But this is absolutely wonderful food. So, I hope you learned something new from cooking with freeze-dried food and incorporating a sous vide into the mix. I know that sous vides can be a little bit expensive, but if you have a birthday coming up or Christmas is coming up, start dropping hints right now and try a sous vide cooker. I'm not sure if it's a proper term to be a cooker, but it is a wonderful thing to have in addition to other kitchen appliances. And if you don't buy a sous vide, at least try the Wiener Schnitzel. It's wonderful. So I want to thank you for your time. I hope you learned something. I enjoyed doing this. Please subscribe, and we'll send another video your way as soon as possible. And go forth and freeze dry the world.